The sun was just starting to peek over the jagged mountains of Afghanistan when the helicopter blades cut through the cold morning air. Inside the bird, 6 men sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. They weren't just any soldiers. They were Navy SEALs, and they'd been through hell and back together more times than they could count. Lieutenant David Chen checked his watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. He was the team leader, 32 years old, with a wife and a baby girl back home in San Diego. The weight of command never got easier, no matter how many missions he ran. Every time they went out, he carried 6 lives on his shoulders, and that responsibility kept him awake at night. Sitting across from him was Chief Petty Officer James Rodriguez, the oldest guy on the team at 38. Everyone called him Chief, and he'd been doing this job since before some of these kids could drive. His weathered face told stories of 100 missions, and his calm presence steadied the younger guys when things got rough. Next to Chief was Tyler Jackson, the team's sniper. 29 years old, farm boy from Montana, and he could shoot the wings off a fly at 1,000 yards. He had that quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly what he was capable of. His rifle was an extension of his body, and he treated it better than most people treated their cars. Danny Kim handled communications, 27, quick with a joke, quicker with his hands on the radio equipment. He was the guy who kept them connected to the outside world, the lifeline when everything went sideways. His parents had emigrated from South Korea before he was born, and he'd grown up in Queens, New York, dreaming of serving his country. The team medic was Alex Patterson, 30 years old, former paramedic from Chicago who'd joined the Navy to do something bigger with his life. He had a gentle way about him that seemed at odds with being a SEAL, but when someone got hurt, there was nobody better to have by your side. He'd saved more lives than he could remember, and lost a few he couldn't forget. And then there was the youngest member of the team, 24-year-old Ryan Webb. Blonde hair, bright eyes, still had that eager energy that came from being relatively new to the teams. He'd proven himself on 3 deployments, but he still had that need to show the older guys he belonged. David saw a lot of his younger self in Ryan, which made him both proud and protective. The pilot's voice crackled over their headsets. 5 minutes to drop zone. David nodded, even though the pilot couldn't see him. He ran through the mission parameters one more time in his head. They were going deep into Taliban territory to observe a compound where intelligence suggested a high-value target was hiding. No engagement unless absolutely necessary. Get in, gather intel, get out. Simple on paper. Never simple in reality. The helicopter descended fast, and the men felt their stomachs drop with it. This was always the worst part, the moment between the safety of the air and the uncertainty of the ground. The bird touched down for just 30 seconds, long enough for the 6 SEALs to jump out and disappear into the rocky terrain. Then the helicopter was gone, and they were alone in enemy territory. They moved in single file, weapons at the ready, eyes scanning every shadow. The mountains here were unforgiving, all sharp rocks and loose gravel that made every step treacherous. The altitude made breathing harder, and the sun was already starting to heat up the day. But these men had trained in conditions worse than this. They moved like ghosts, barely making a sound. Chief was on point, leading them through a path he'd memorized from satellite images. Tyler covered their 6, constantly checking behind them for any sign of pursuit. Danny kept one hand on his radio, ready to call for support if needed. Alex stayed close to the middle, his medical kit bouncing slightly against his back. Ryan moved just ahead of David, his youth making him naturally faster and more eager. They'd been moving for 2 hours when Chief raised his fist, the signal to stop. Everyone froze. David moved up quietly to see what Chief had spotted. There in the dirt were boot prints, recent ones, not American issue. And they were fresh, maybe an hour old. Chief looked at David, his weathered face showing concern. They were still 3 clicks from their target, and someone had been through here recently. Could be shepherds, could be Taliban scouts, could be nothing. But in this line of work, nothing was ever nothing. David made the call. They'd continue, but with extra caution. They needed this intel. Command had been tracking this target for 6 months, and this was their best shot at confirming his location. But David's gut was telling him something wasn't right. A good officer listened to his gut. They moved slower now, checking every rock, every shadow. Tyler started seeing things that bothered him. Disturbed gravel where someone had tried to cover their tracks. A cigarette butt that looked too new. Small signs that told a story if you knew how to read them. Ryan felt it too. He'd been on enough missions to recognize when the air felt wrong. It was like nature itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He wanted to say something, but he didn't want to seem nervous in front of the older guys, so he stayed quiet and kept his weapon ready. After another hour of climbing, they reached their observation point. The compound sat in a valley below them, surrounded by high walls and guard towers. Through their scopes, they could see activity, men moving around, vehicles coming and going. But something was off. There were way more people down there than intelligence had suggested. David counted at least 40 fighters, maybe more. The briefing had said 20 max. This wasn't just a safe house, this was a stronghold. He felt his stomach tighten. "Chief, what do you see?" he whispered into his radio. "Too many bad guys, LT. Way too many. This doesn't match what we were told." Tyler was scanning the compound through his scope when he noticed something else. "Boss, check out the northwest corner. That's a heavy machine gun emplacement, and there's another one on the south wall. These guys are dug in like they're expecting trouble." Danny had his equipment out, photographing everything, documenting the scene. This was valuable intel, even if it wasn't what they'd expected to find. But he kept glancing around nervously. Something felt wrong. Then Chief saw it. Movement on the ridgeline to their east. Just a flash, maybe the sun reflecting off something metal. He focused his scope on that spot and felt his blood run cold. Armed men, at least a dozen of them, moving into position above the SEAL team's location. "Contact east," Chief hissed urgently. "We've got fighters moving to flank us." David spun around and saw them. They weren't wandering, they weren't patrolling. They were moving with purpose, and that purpose was to surround the SEAL team. His mind raced through the possibilities, and he came to the conclusion he didn't want to face. They'd walked into a trap. "We're blown," he said quietly into his radio. "They knew we were coming." As if to confirm his worst fear, the radio crackled with Taliban chatter on the enemy frequencies. They were coordinating, moving into position. Danny's face went pale as he listened. "Boss, they're saying they've got Americans pinned down. They knew we were here before we even got here." The next few seconds felt like hours. David's mind went into overdrive, calculating angles, distances, options. They could try to run, but they'd be exposed. They could stay and fight, but they were outnumbered at least 7-1. They could call for extraction, but air support was at least 30 minutes out. Rodriguez looked at David, and in that look was a lifetime of experience and trust. They'd been in bad spots before. They'd always found a way out. But both men knew this was different. This was worse than anything they'd faced before. Ryan felt his heart pounding in his chest. This was his 4th deployment. But something about this moment felt final, felt heavy in a way he'd never experienced. He looked at the older guys, searching their faces for confidence, for a sign that everything would be okay. And then the valley below erupted with movement. Fighters poured out of the compound, dozens of them, all moving in their direction. The trap was springing shut, and the 6 Americans were caught right in the middle of it. Chief Rodriguez chambered around and said quietly, "Well, boys, looks like we're about to earn our pay." The first shots came from everywhere at once. Bullets cracked through the air, ricocheting off rocks and sending stone fragments flying. David felt a round pass so close to his head that he heard the snap of it cutting through the air. Instinct took over, and all 6 SEALs dropped and scrambled for cover behind whatever they could find. "Return fire." "Get to the ravine," David shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Tyler's rifle barked 3 times in rapid succession, and through his scope he saw 2 enemy fighters drop. But for every one that fell, 3 more seemed to appear. They were coming from the ridgeline, from the compound, from positions that had clearly been prepared in advance. This wasn't a chance encounter. The Taliban had known exactly where the SEALs would be. Chief Rodriguez dragged himself behind a large boulder, his rifle already working methodically. He didn't shoot wildly like the enemy. Every shot was aimed, every trigger pulled deliberate. That's what 20 years of experience taught you. Panic killed you. Discipline kept you alive, at least for a while longer. Danny was on the radio immediately, his voice urgent but controlled. Viper 6, this is Shadow 2-1. We are under heavy fire. Multiple hostiles, estimate 50+. Request immediate air support and extraction. Grid coordinates November Delta 478, 362. The response crackled back through static. Shadow 2-1, copy your traffic. Be advised nearest air support is 29 minutes out. Ground extraction unit is 45 minutes. Can you hold position? Danny looked at David and they both knew what 45 minutes meant. It meant forever. It meant they'd be out of ammunition long before help arrived. David grabbed the radio. Negative on holding current position. We're moving to secondary extraction point. We'll mark with IR strobe when we get there. If we get there. Alex Patterson was already moving, crawling on his belly toward the ravine David had pointed out. It was maybe 30 yards away, but it might as well have been 30 miles. Bullets kicked up dirt all around him as he moved. He could hear them shouting in Pashto, coordinating their attack, celebrating their imminent victory. Tyler was covering Alex's movement, his rifle firing with mechanical precision. One shot, one target down. Another shot, another fighter eliminated. But his shoulder suddenly exploded in pain and he felt himself spun around by the impact. A bullet had found him, tearing through his shoulder and exiting out the back. The rifle fell from his hands as the world went white with pain. Man down. Tyler's hit. Ryan was closest to him, and without thinking he lunged forward and grabbed Tyler's vest, dragging him toward cover. Bullets chewed up the ground where they'd just been lying. Ryan felt something hot graze his arm, but adrenaline kept him moving. He pulled Tyler behind a rock formation and immediately started checking the wound. I'm okay, Tyler gasped, though his face was white and sweat was pouring down his forehead. Just get my rifle. Don't leave my rifle. Ryan grabbed the sniper rifle and pulled it to safety. Tyler's blood was all over the stock, but the weapon was still operational. That rifle had saved their lives more times than Ryan could count. 'Twasn't getting left behind. Alex reached them a second later, his medical training kicking in automatically. Let me see it. He ripped open Tyler's uniform and assessed the wound. Through and through, missed the bone, but it was bleeding heavily. He packed the wound with gauze and wrapped it tight. You're not dying today, brother. Not on my watch. David and Chief were laying down covering fire, trying to give the others time to regroup, but the enemy fire was intensifying. These weren't random shots anymore. The Taliban fighters were moving tactically, using cover, advancing in coordinated rushes. Someone down there knew what they were doing. David, we need to move now, Chief shouted. His magazine was already running low and he slapped in a fresh one, his hands moving automatically from muscle memory. But he could feel the weight of his vest and knew they didn't have enough ammunition for a prolonged fight. David assessed their situation in the span of a heartbeat. 6 men, 1 wounded, surrounded by 50+ hostiles, no immediate support. The ravine would give them better cover, but it was also a potential death trap. If the enemy got above them, they'd be sitting ducks. But staying here meant getting overrun in the next 5 minutes. Move to the ravine. Ryan, help Tyler. Danny, stay on that radio. Chief and Alex, we cover them. The team moved like they'd practiced 1,000 times. Ryan got under Tyler's good shoulder and half carried, half dragged him toward the ravine. Danny ran backwards, his rifle firing in controlled bursts while his other hand clutched the radio to his chest, like it was made of gold. Because it was their lifeline, and without it, they were already dead. David and Chief moved in bounds, one firing while the other ran, then switching. It was basic infantry tactics, but it worked because they trusted each other completely. Chief laid down fire and David ran. Then David found cover and fired and Chief moved. 20 yards. 15 yards. 10 yards out of a burst of automatic fire stitched across Chief's path, and David watched in horror as the older man stumbled and went down. Chief, I'm hit, leg. Chief gritted his teeth against the pain and kept firing from where he'd fallen. David ran to him, bullets snapping all around, and grabbed his vest. Chief was heavy, all muscle and gear, but David pulled him with everything he had. His legs burned, his lungs screamed, but he got Chief to the edge of the ravine where willing hands pulled them both to safety. The ravine was maybe 8 feet deep and ran for about 50 yards. It wasn't much, but it was better than being completely exposed. The 6 men collapsed into it, breathing hard, their ears ringing from the gunfire. For a moment there was a lull in the shooting as the Taliban repositioned. Alex was immediately working on Chief's leg. The bullet had gone through his calf and blood was pooling in his boot. It's not arterial, but you're not walking on this anytime soon. He started working to stop the bleeding, his hands steady despite the chaos around them. David did a quick assessment. Tyler shot in the shoulder, Chief shot in the leg, everyone else scraped and bruised but functional. They had maybe 20 magazines left between them, and they were burning through ammunition fast. The enemy had unlimited reinforcements and supplies. The math didn't look good. "Danny, where's our air support?" Danny had the radio pressed to his ear, listening intently. 22 minutes. They're pushing it as fast as they can, but they're coming from Kandahar. It's just going to take time we don't have. Time, that was the enemy now. Every minute felt like an hour. Every second counted. David looked at his team, these men he'd lived with, fought with, bled with. 2 of them were wounded. The others were running on adrenaline and training. How long could they hold? The Taliban fighters started advancing again and the SEALs opened fire. Their shots were precise, disciplined. Every round had to count. Tyler, despite his wounded shoulder, had his rifle up and was firing. His jaw clenched against the pain. Each shot found its target. The enemy advance faltered as bodies dropped, but they kept coming. For every fighter that fell, 2 more took his place. They were using overwhelming numbers and it was working. The SEALs were being pushed back, deeper into the ravine, and everyone knew that once they ran out of room to retreat, it was over. Ryan was firing his rifle when he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was David, and the look in his eyes was serious in a way Ryan had never seen before. "Ryan, listen to me carefully," David said, his voice low so only Ryan could hear. "We need air support to know exactly where to drop their ordnance. We need someone to get to higher ground and give them precision coordinates. Someone fast, someone who can move." Ryan felt his stomach drop. He understood what David was asking. "You want me to leave you guys?" "I want you to save us," David corrected. "You're the youngest, the fastest. You can make it to that ridge line to the west. Get there, get on the radio and guide those fighters in. But you have to go now before they close the circle completely." Ryan looked at the other men. Chief, bleeding but still fighting. Tyler, white-faced with pain but refusing to quit. Alex, Danny, all of them giving everything they had. The thought of leaving them made him feel sick. "I can't leave you. I won't." "That's an order, Petty Officer Webb," David said, using his rank, making it official. "We need you to do this. We're all counting on you. Your brothers are counting on you." Chief heard the conversation and nodded at Ryan. "Go, kid. Run like hell. We'll keep these guys busy. You just get us that air support." Tyler managed a pained smile. "I didn't get shot so you could stick around and hold my hand. Get moving." Danny tossed Ryan his backup radio and a signal flare. 300 meters west, straight up that slope. You'll have line of sight to guide in the fighters. We'll give you covering fire, but you can't stop. Don't look back. Just run." Alex squeezed Ryan's arm. "When you get back to base, you tell my wife I love her. Tell her I was thinking about her." The way he said it, like he might not get to say it himself, made Ryan's throat tighten. David looked into Ryan's eyes. "On my mark, we all open up and give you cover. You run like your life depends on it. Because all our lives depend on it. Ready?" Ryan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His heart was hammering so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. He was about to leave his brothers, his team, in the middle of a... Ryan reached the top of the ridge and collapsed, gasping for air. His lungs felt like they were on fire, and his legs were shaking so badly he could barely stand. But he forced himself up, forced himself to focus. Below him, maybe 300 meters away, the ravine where his team was pinned down looked impossibly small. Smoke drifted up from multiple points, and the sound of gunfire was constant, relentless. He grabbed the radio with trembling hands. "Viper 6, this is Shadow 2-1 Bravo. I have eyes on target area, ready to provide coordinates for air support. How far out are you?" The response came immediately, the pilot's voice calm and professional. "Shadow 2-1 Bravo, this is Viper 6. We are 12 minutes out. 2 F-16s carrying precision munitions. Send coordinates when ready. 12 minutes. Ryan looked down at the ravine and felt his stomach twist. Could they hold for 12 more minutes? He pressed the binoculars to his eyes and tried to assess the situation. He could see Taliban fighters everywhere, surrounding the ravine, closing in from all sides. There had to be 60 of them, maybe more. Then he saw movement in the ravine itself, one of his teammates firing, then ducking back. Another figure dragging someone who wasn't moving. Ryan felt panic rising in his throat. Who was down? Was it Chief Tyler? He couldn't tell from this distance. He started calling in coordinates, his voice shaking despite his best efforts to stay calm. He gave the pilot every detail he could see, marking enemy positions, friendly positions, everything that could help. The pilot repeated everything back, confirming. They would come in from the north, drop their payload on the enemy concentrations, then circle back for a second pass if needed. If needed. If any of them were still alive by then. Ryan watched through his binoculars, feeling completely helpless. He could see his brothers fighting for their lives, and there was nothing he could do but watch and wait. Then something caught his eye. A Taliban fighter on the eastern ridge, maybe 400 meters from the ravine, was setting up what looked like a heavy machine gun. If he got that thing operational and positioned right, he could fire directly down into the ravine. His team would be torn apart. Come on, someone see him, Ryan muttered desperately. Tyler, look east. Come on, buddy, look east. But Tyler was wounded, and the team was focused on the immediate threats surrounding them. Nobody was watching that eastern ridge. The fighter finished setting up the machine gun and started to swing it around toward the ravine. Ryan raised his own rifle, knowing it was pointless. The shot was too far, at least 800 meters. He was a decent shot, but he wasn't Tyler. Tyler could make that shot. Tyler could make that shot in his sleep. But Tyler was down there bleeding, and this fighter was about to massacre his friends. The Taliban fighter settled behind his weapon, taking aim. Ryan could see him clearly through his scope. In seconds, he would open fire, and the SEALs would have nowhere to hide. Ryan felt tears of frustration burning in his eyes. He was going to watch his brothers die, and there was nothing he could do about it. Then the Taliban fighter's head snapped back, and he crumpled behind his weapon. Ryan blinked, confused. What just happened? He scanned the area, trying to understand. Had someone from the team somehow made that shot? But no. Everyone was still pinned down in the ravine. Another Taliban fighter rushed to the machine gun, trying to take his fallen comrade's place. Before he could even get behind the weapon, he too dropped, falling sideways over the rocks. A clean shot, instant kill. Ryan's heart started racing for a different reason now. Someone else was out here. Someone was shooting, and it wasn't his team. He scanned the landscape frantically, trying to find the shooter. Where were they? Who were they? A third fighter fell, this one trying to flank the ravine from the south. Then a fourth advancing from the north. Then a fifth. The shots were coming from somewhere to Ryan's west, maybe on a higher ridge, but Ryan couldn't see anyone. Just rocks and shadows and empty mountainside. But the Taliban fighters noticed. Ryan could see the confusion spreading through their ranks. They started looking around wildly, trying to find this new threat. Some of them turned away from the ravine entirely, facing outward, searching for an enemy they couldn't see. Down in the ravine, David noticed it too. The pressure on their position suddenly eased. Fighters who had been advancing aggressively were now taking cover, looking confused. Some were pointing at their fallen comrades, clearly killed by shots from a completely different direction. What the hell is going on? Danny shouted, changing magazines. I don't know, but I'll take it. Chief grunted, firing at a fighter who had made the mistake of standing up to get a better look around. The man went down, and Chief allowed himself a grim smile. Someone's helping us. Don't ask questions. Just keep shooting! Tyler, despite the pain in his shoulder, had his scope up and was scanning the surrounding terrain. His trained eye caught what the others missed. On a ridge to the northwest, maybe 800 meters out, there was the faintest glint of metal. Just for a second, then it was gone. But Tyler had been a sniper long enough to know what he was seeing. There's someone on the northwest ridge. Friendly fire, boss. Someone's covering us. David didn't understand it, but right now he didn't care. The enemy fire was decreasing, and that meant his team might actually survive this. Whoever you are, keep shooting! He yelled into the wind, knowing the words would never reach the mysterious shooter. And keep shooting they did. From his position, Ryan watched in amazement as the invisible sniper systematically took apart the Taliban ambush. It wasn't random shooting. It was surgical. Every shot eliminated a specific threat. A fighter about to throw a grenade, a commander trying to rally his men, anyone getting too close to the ravine. The shooter seemed to know exactly where to place each round for maximum effect. The Taliban fighters were panicking now. They'd gone from having the Americans trapped and helpless to being the ones hunted. They couldn't see their attacker. They couldn't fight back against an enemy they couldn't find. Some of them started retreating, scrambling back down the mountainside toward the compound. Ryan got back on the radio. Viper 6, the situation has changed. We have unknown friendly providing fire support. Multiple hostiles down. Enemy formation is breaking up. The pilot's response showed his confusion. Shadow 2-1 Bravo, say again? Unknown friendly. We show no other units in your area. I don't care what you show, Ryan replied, watching another Taliban fighter drop through his binoculars. Someone is out here and they're on our side. Air support is still needed, but the immediate pressure is off. For 10 crucial minutes, the mysterious sniper provided cover. The Taliban fighters who didn't retreat were picked off one by one. It was like watching a ghost work, Ryan thought. No muzzle flash he could see. No sound that reached him. Just Taliban fighters falling one after another with perfect precision. David and his team used the opportunity to regroup. Alex worked on stabilizing Chief and Tyler as best he could with limited supplies. Danny kept monitoring the radio frequencies, trying to figure out if there were any friendly units in the area that might explain their guardian angel. But there was nothing. No radio chatter. No acknowledgement. Just silence. This doesn't make sense, Danny said, his face troubled. There's nobody else out here. The nearest friendlies are back at base. So who the hell is shooting? Tyler had a theory, crazy as it sounded. I've heard stories. Rumors from the Afghan fighters we work with. They talk about a ghost in these mountains. A lone fighter who hunts the Taliban. They say he's been here for years, living like a hermit, killing enemy fighters and then disappearing. That's just local legend, Alex said, though his voice wasn't entirely convinced. Right? Tyler shrugged his good shoulder and immediately regretted it as pain shot through his wound. Maybe, but legends have to start somewhere. And right now I'm looking at something I can't explain. David didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in what he could see. And what he could see was that someone had just saved their lives. Someone with skills that matched or exceeded their own. Someone who clearly knew what they were doing. Friend or foe, ally or loner. Right now that person was the only reason his team was still breathing. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the shooting from the ridge stopped. Ryan scanned desperately with his binoculars, trying to catch one more glimpse of the mysterious sniper. But there was nothing. Just empty mountainside and the wind moving through the rocks. He's gone, Ryan whispered into his radio. Whoever it was, they're gone. The Taliban fighters who remained were in full retreat now, running back toward their compound, dragging their wounded with them. They'd come out expecting an easy victory and had been dealt a devastating loss. At least 20 of their fighters lay dead or dying on the mountainside, and they had no idea who had done it. The sound of jet engines split the air, and Ryan looked up to see 2 F-16s screaming overhead. Viper 6, this is Shadow 2-1 Bravo. Hostiles are retreating. You can still engage the compound itself if you have clearance. Roger that. Stand by. The jets made one pass to assess, then came around again. Ryan watched as missiles streaked from under their wings, impacting on the compound below. Secondary explosions followed, and Ryan knew they'd hit something important. Maybe weapons cache, maybe vehicle depot. Either way, the base hospital smelled like antiseptic and coffee, and David Chen had spent more hours there than he cared to count. 3 days had passed since the ambush, and both Tyler and Chief were recovering well. Tyler's shoulder would heal in a few months, and Chief's leg would take some physical therapy. But the doctors said both men would make full recoveries. That was the good news. The bad news was that David couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that ravine, heard the bullets, felt the weight of knowing they were about to die. And then he saw those Taliban fighters dropping, one after another, killed by shots from an impossible distance. By a ghost. By someone who shouldn't exist. He'd been debriefed extensively. So had the entire team. The intelligence officers wanted to know everything about their mysterious savior. David told them what little he knew, which was essentially nothing. Someone had been on that ridge. Someone had exceptional sniper skills. Someone had decided to help them. That was it. That was all he had. The official report listed the incident as unknown friendly fire, source unidentified, which was military speak for we have no idea what happened, but we're not going to admit it. David found himself in the intelligence center late at night, scrolling through satellite imagery of the area, The analysts had already been through it dozens of times, but David needed to see for himself. He pulled up the images from the day of the ambush, focusing on that northwest ridge where Tyler had spotted the glint of metal. Nothing. The satellite photos showed empty mountainside. No heat signatures. No movement. No sign that anyone had been there at all. It was like their guardian angel had never existed, except for the 20 dead Taliban fighters who proved otherwise. "You're not going to find anything," a voice said behind him. David turned to see Ryan standing in the doorway, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He walked over and handed one to David. "I've been looking too, every night since we got back. There's nothing there." David took the coffee gratefully. "Then where did the shots come from?" "We didn't imagine it. Those fighters died. The ballistics reports confirm they were killed by high-powered rifle rounds from extreme range." Ryan sat down next to him, staring at the screen. "I saw him, boss. Well, I saw where he was shooting from. I watched those Taliban fighters drop. It was real. He was real. But it's like he's a ghost or something." "Ghosts don't leave shell casings," David muttered. "When we were extracted, I should have insisted we go check that ridge. Should have pushed for a recovery team." "There wasn't time," Ryan reminded him. "And honestly, I don't think we would have found anything. Whoever this person is, they know how to disappear." David pulled up another file, this one containing all reported incidents of unexplained enemy casualties in the region over the past 5 years. It was a long list, too long to be coincidence. Taliban fighters found dead with no witnesses, ambushes disrupted by unknown fire, patrols that vanished without explanation. The pattern went back years. "Someone's been hunting them," David said slowly, connecting dots in his head. "For years someone's been out here operating alone, killing Taliban fighters. How is that possible? How do you survive that long in enemy territory, completely alone?" Ryan had been thinking about the same question. "You'd have to be incredibly skilled, know the terrain perfectly, live off the land, never stay in one place long, and you'd have to have a reason, something that kept you going when any sane person would have given up." Over the next week, David became obsessed. He couldn't let it go. He interviewed local Afghan interpreters, asking if they'd heard any stories about lone fighters in the mountains. Most looked at him like he was crazy, but a few, the older ones, nodded knowingly. One interpreter, a man named Bashir, who'd been working with American forces for over a decade, finally opened up. "The Taliban fear him," Bashir said quietly, making sure they were alone. "They call him the Shadow. They say he cannot be killed because he is already dead, that he is a spirit seeking revenge. But I have spoken with villagers who say different. They say he is a man, a foreign man, who stayed behind when his brothers left. They say he protects their villages from the Taliban." "For how long?" David asked, leaning forward intently. Bashir thought for a moment. "The stories began maybe 15 years ago. Maybe more. At first people thought it was just luck, or brave villagers defending themselves. But then the pattern became clear. When Taliban would raid a village, sometimes they would be found dead later, shot from long distance. When they would try to establish checkpoints in certain areas, their men would disappear. He moves through the mountains like smoke, and he leaves only death behind him." David felt chills run down his spine. 15 years. That meant whoever this person was, they'd been fighting longer than some of the guys on his team had been in the military, fighting alone, without support, without recognition, without the promise of ever going home. "Do you know his name?" David asked, though he knew it was a long shot. Bashir shook his head. "If anyone knows, they do not speak it. But there was a time years ago when the Americans lost soldiers in an ambush. The bodies were recovered, but one was never found. Some say that soldier did not die. Some say he chose to stay, to keep fighting." David spent hours in the records room after that conversation, pulling files on every American casualty and MIA report from the region. There were dozens of them, stretching back to the earliest days of the war. Each one was a tragedy, a life cut short, a family left behind to grieve. He was about to give up when he found it. A report from 2005. Army Rangers ambushed during a supply convoy. 8 killed in action. 1 listed as MIA, body never recovered. The soldier's name was Sergeant William Hayes. No relation to David, but the name gave him chills anyway. David pulled Hayes' service record. He'd been a ranger, trained sniper, expert in mountain warfare and survival. His file was impressive. Multiple commendations, expert marksman rating, survival instructor certification. This was a man who could survive in harsh conditions. A man who could live off the land and fight alone. The file included a photo. Hayes was 30 years old when he went missing, lean and hard with the kind of eyes that had seen too much. And according to the report, his younger brother, Private Michael Hayes, had been killed in the same ambush, right in front of him, according to witness statements. William Hayes had been wounded trying to save his brother and disappeared in the chaos of the fight. David stared at that photo for a long time. If William Hayes had survived that ambush, and if he blamed himself for his brother's death, would he have gone home? Or would he have stayed in the mountains fighting a private war, trying to save other brothers the way he couldn't save his own? It was just speculation. David had no proof. The man could be dead, his body lost in some ravine or cave, bones picked clean by time and the elements. But David didn't think so. He thought about those precise shots, that professional discipline, that willingness to risk exposure to save American lives. That was someone with training, someone with purpose, someone who'd been doing this a long time. He shared his theory with his team. They were all together in Tyler's hospital room, and David laid out everything he'd found. The pattern of Taliban casualties, the local stories, the missing ranger from 2005, the pieces of a puzzle that might not fit together but might explain the impossible. "You think this Hayes guy has been out there for 20 years?" Danny asked, his voice skeptical but intrigued. "Living in caves, killing Taliban? That's like something out of a movie." "It sounds crazy," David admitted. "But what's the alternative?" "We all saw what happened. Someone saved us and it wasn't luck. It was skill. Professional-level marksmanship and tactical awareness. That takes training and experience." Chief, his leg elevated and wrapped in bandages, nodded slowly. "I've seen a lot of crazy things in my career. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people are capable of surviving anything if they have a reason. If this Hayes lost his brother and felt responsible, that could be enough. That kind of guilt and grief can drive a man to do the impossible." Tyler was staring at his hands, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet. "I've been thinking about those shots. The distance, the precision, the target selection. Whoever was on that ridge wasn't just good. They were master level, world class. You don't get that good unless you've been practicing for years, unless it's all you do day after day." Alex added his perspective as the team's medic. Living in those conditions for 20 years would take an incredible toll. Malnutrition, exposure, untreated injuries, no medical care. The human body isn't designed for that kind of sustained stress. If Hayes is still out there, he's probably in rough shape. Ryan had been quiet through most of the discussion, but now he spoke up. "Does it matter who he is? I mean, yeah, I want to know. We all do. But even if we never find out his name, we know what he did. He saved our lives. Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts for everything," David said firmly. "And that's why I can't let this go. We owe him, all of us. Even if it's just knowing his story, making sure he's not forgotten, we owe him that much." Over the following weeks, David continued his investigation whenever he had spare time. He reached out to veterans groups trying to find anyone who had served with William Hayes. He found a few who remembered him, all of them speaking high. 6 months had passed since the ambush, and David Chen found himself back in Afghanistan for another rotation. Tyler and Chief had both made full recoveries and were back with the team. Though Chief walked with a slight limp he insisted wasn't there. The team had completed 3 successful missions since their return, and on paper everything was back to normal. But David couldn't stop thinking about the mountains and the man who might be living in them. Every time they flew over that region, he found himself scanning the ridgelines looking for something he knew he'd never see. His team noticed his distraction, but nobody said anything. They all thought about their mysterious guardian sometimes. How could they not? The current mission was different from their usual operations. A humanitarian effort in a remote village that had been helping American forces for years. The villagers needed medical supplies and food, and David's team had volunteered to deliver them personally. It was rare to get missions like this, ones where they could actually see the good their presence did. The village was small, maybe 200 people, nestled in a valley surrounded by towering peaks, the kind of place that time seemed to have forgotten. The elders greeted them warmly, and the team spent the afternoon distributing supplies and providing basic medical care. Alex was in his element, treating injuries and illnesses with the limited supplies they'd brought. An old man approached David as the sun started to set. He had to be 80 if he was a day, his face weathered like old leather, his hands gnarled from a lifetime of hard work. He spoke in Pashto, and their interpreter, Bashir, translated. "He says he has something for you," Bashir said, looking puzzled. "Something he was told to give to an American officer if one ever came to the village again." David felt his heart rate increase without knowing why. "What is it?" The old man reached into his robe and pulled out something that caught the fading sunlight. A dog tag. He placed it carefully in David's hand, and David felt the metal still warm from the old man's body. He turned it over and read the inscription, his hand starting to shake. "Sergeant William Hayes, U.S. Army Rangers, 2003." Time seemed to stop. David stared at the tag, his mind racing. This was him. This was proof. Hayes had been here, in this village. Might still be here. "Where did you get this?" David asked urgently, his voice tight with emotion. "Where is he? Where's the man who gave you this?" The old man spoke at length, and Bashir translated slowly, carefully. "He says the soldier came to their village many times over the years. Always at night, always alone. He would warn them when Taliban were coming, would help defend them when raids happened. The soldier saved his grandson's life once, killed 3 Taliban fighters who were going to execute the boy. This was maybe 3 months ago. 3 months. Hayes had been here 3 months ago." David felt dizzy with the realization. "Is he still here? Can you take me to him?" The old man's face grew sad, and he shook his head as he spoke. Bashir's translation came quietly. "The soldier came one final time 2 weeks ago. He looked very tired, very old. He said his war was finished. He gave the elder this tag and asked that it be returned to American soldiers if any came. He said to tell them that he was glad he could help one last time. Then he walked north into the high mountains. The elder believes he went to die in peace." "No," David said, the word coming out harder than he intended. "We have to find him. He might still be alive. We have to try." The old man spoke again, his voice firm but not unkind. "He says the soldier did not want to be found. He wanted to rest, to finally be free of his pain. The elder asks that you respect the soldier's wishes." David wanted to argue, wanted to organize a search party immediately, wanted to scour every mountain and valley until they found Hayes and brought him home. But he looked at the old man's face and saw dignity there and respect and something like love. Hayes had protected these people for years. They knew him better than David ever could. "Tell him thank you," David said finally, his voice thick. "Tell him we're grateful for everything the soldier did, for these people and for us." The old man smiled and placed his weathered hand on David's shoulder. "Through Bashir," he said, "the soldier spoke of you. Not by name, but I know it was you. He watched your team fight that day. He said he saw brothers protecting each other, reminded him of why he stayed. He said helping you gave him peace he had not felt in many years. You gave him that gift. Remember this." That night, David sat alone outside the village, the dog tag in his hand, looking up at the mountains bathed in moonlight. They looked different now, knowing that somewhere in those peaks a man had lived and fought and finally found his rest. A man who'd given everything, asked for nothing, and saved lives until he had nothing left to give. Ryan found him there an hour later. "The guys told me about the tag, about Hayes." David nodded but didn't speak. Ryan sat down beside him, and they were quiet for a while. Just 2 soldiers sitting in the darkness thinking about a third they'd never met. "Do you think he's really gone?" Ryan asked finally. "I think he did what he came here to do," David replied. "I think he fought until he couldn't fight anymore. And I think at the end he was ready to stop. He saved us," Ryan said softly. "We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him." "I know." David turned the dog tag over in his hand, feeling the weight of it. Such a small thing, but it represented an entire life. A man's service, his sacrifice, his choices. "I'm going to make sure people know. I'm going to make sure his family knows he died a hero." When they returned to base, David wrote a letter. Not a report, not an official document, but a personal letter to the Hayes family. He found William's sister through military records, and he told her everything. About the evidence he'd found, about the villages Hayes had protected, about the day Hayes had saved 6 American lives without asking for recognition or reward. He told her that her brother had not died in 2005 as presumed. He'd lived and he'd continued to serve, continued to fight, continued to protect others until his final days. He'd become a legend in those mountains, a guardian who kept watch over people who couldn't protect themselves. He'd died on his own terms in a place he'd chosen, having made a difference that would be remembered for generations. The letter was honest about the speculation involved, about the lack of official proof, about the possibility that he was wrong. But David included photographs of the dog tag, statements from villagers who'd known Hayes, and the conviction in his heart that told him this was true. 3 weeks later, he received a response. William Hayes's sister wrote that the family had never given up hope, had never truly believed he was dead. She said William and Michael had been inseparable growing up, and when Michael died, something in William had broken. The family had hoped he'd found peace somehow, somewhere. Now they knew he had. She thanked David for the letter, for the closure, for letting them know that William had continued to be the protector he'd always been. She said they would hold a memorial service, a proper goodbye after 20 years of waiting, and she asked if David would speak, would tell people about the brother her family had lost and the hero who'd remained. David agreed. When his rotation ended and he returned home, he attended that service. The chapel was full of veterans, family members, and people whose lives William Hayes had touched before he disappeared. David stood at the podium and told the story, not with military precision or official language, but from the heart. He talked about a team that had been ambushed, about impossible odds and certain death. He talked about shots from the shadows that had turned the tide. He talked about a man who'd chosen the hardest path because he believed in protecting his brothers. Even if those brothers would never know his name. William Hayes never came home, David said, his voice steady despite the emotion he felt. But he never stopped serving. He spent 20 years in those mountains protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, saving lives right up until the end. He paid the highest price, gave the ultimate sacrifice, and he did it without recognition, without support, without hope of reward. That's not just heroism, that's something beyond words. David pulled out the dog tag and held it up for everyone to see. This is all that came back. But it's enough. Because it tells us that Sergeant William Hayes was there, that he fought, that he made a difference. And because of him, 6 American soldiers came home to their families. Because of him, Afghan villages survived Taliban raids. Because of him, the world is a little bit better than it would have been without him. He placed the dog tag on a memorial table next to a photograph of William and Michael Hayes together, 2 brothers in uniform, smiling at the camera with their whole lives ahead of them. David saluted the photo and everyone in the chapel stood and saluted with him. After the service, William's sister approached David. She was in her 50s now, with kind eyes that reminded David of the photo he'd seen. "Thank you for bringing my brother home," she said quietly. "Not his body, but his story. His memory. That's what matters." "He saved my life," David replied simply. "He saved all of us. I just made sure people knew." She hugged him then, and David felt the weight of 6 months of searching, of wondering, of needing to know settle and finally release. He'd done what he could. He'd honored the debt. It would never be enough, could never be enough, but it was something.